I usually will let guests introduce themselves, but with your permission, I'm going to do a little introduction simply because you recently published a book, which is what kind of brought us to where we are. So today we have Cassandra Alexander, RN, who is also an author of this wonderful book, Year of the Nurse. Okay. So before we jump into this, let me tell you that I'm a reader and have been my whole life. However, after nursing school, I wasn't able to read the same because all the reading that you did in nursing school kind of burned me out. So very seldom do I get books now that I just devour like I did before. I did, and yours was one of those.
Oh,
And so
thank
I'm
you.
very proud of myself. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm actually reading this book, and I don't feel the need to like put it down or stop. It's flowing like it used to. So that's wonderful, wonderful. So I'll tell you that all of our conversations, the only question I ever have in mind when I go into a conversation is, how did Cassandra, or do you want Cassandra,
No,
Cassie, which is
actually,
better?
I need to figure out how to switch my name here for a second, if you don't mind.
Okay, no problem.
I Yeah, it's been a while. Usually, I use Cassie for my fiction, and then I use tried to use Cassandra for this, so it would be
Okay.
separate on Amazon. But honestly, I don't know that I'm going to be able to fix that.
And I'm not
So
sure. I think you can't, like in the participants kind of thing, you may be able to rename yourself, but I don't know what kind of permissions you have with this because
yeah,
this is
with
like the
me,
school one, so I can't.
I think too, maybe because you started recording, it's like, oh, you can't,
Yeah, it
all of a sudden
might
change your name.
be. No
That's
problem.
fine. That's fine. Just if
But
you could just remind people at the end that I'm actually Cassandra if they want to look
oh,
me up, because
definitely. I
otherwise they're going
sure.
to find my vampire stuff.
Oh,
So
definitely. Oh, I will. I definitely will put that out there. So, first of all, how did you get to be Cassandra or Cassie RN? How did the nursing come about?
so I've always known that I wanted to be a writer, and I unfortunately, though, writing doesn't pay very well until you get like very good at it. Or it takes a while to get good at, and then also too, it takes a while to be recognized as being good. And I live in the Bay Area, which is a pretty expensive place to live. And in my prior life, I had thought, oh, I'm going to go to school and become a doctor, and then pull a Michael Crichton and get rich being a doctor and then retire and write. And I think you probably saw in my book that that was actually a lie. Like, he just started writing books right away and never wanted to be a
Right.
doctor.
Mhm.
Um, but by the time, I didn't have Wikipedia or whatever back then in the 90s to figure that out. So when I sat down and thought about how can I fund my writing career, I had all these prereqs to go to nursing school, and I knew that I was interested in medical stuff. So it wasn't a big deal to go ahead and get my name on some lists for some nursing schools. And then eventually one of those kind of cracked. But that's how I got into nursing. It was calculated in a way. I mean, I do enjoy it, or at least aspects of it still now. But just wanted to get paid like a living wage that I could manage to hopefully keep a foot in both worlds.
Oh, wonderful. So, then I got the sense that you are a writer who's also a nurse, because it
Yeah,
sounds like
yeah, yeah,
the writing's always been there, which is great.
yeah.
So, when you started with nursing, what were those initial experiences like, going into nursing? I always ask that because with students, you're in school and there's the school nurse, there's the nurse that's the student, and
Mhm.
that nurse doesn't know what the graduate nurse will learn when she puts her foot on the floor.
Yeah, yeah, gosh. It was so scary. I think it's just universally scary and horrifying because all of a sudden you're in charge of people's lives, and you realize that you're hampered not by a lack of skill, but the fact that you just don't know what you don't know.
Mhm.
And that's the horrifying thing, or at least it was for me, because nursing is such an experiential field. It just takes so long to get good at it, to have had experiences with all the different facets of patient care and what can go wrong with your patients depending on what floor you're in. And so, yeah, just the breadth of things that I did not know used to just scare the bejesus out of me.
Mhm.
And then it's a hard role to be in. I feel like the general populace doesn't necessarily understand, like, how as a nurse you are like at the center of patient care and you're responsible for all the other specialties. You're like this nexus for, did they get PT today? Has speech therapy come by? Have their relatives been contacted? Have you followed up with the doctor for orders and stuff? And that's something that people can tell you about, but that not necessarily nursing school can prepare you for until you get on the floor, and then you start to realize that in addition to like just sheer patient care, you have to do all these other time management tasks too.
Yeah, it definitely, I would say that was definitely a challenge for me. I'm an old labor and delivery nurse. So I did labor and delivery for night shift for 10 years before
Oh
I
my
became a
gosh.
nurse. Now I'm a nurse practitioner in a clinic daytime. But yeah, so yeah, the things that you don't know. And the thing that I think is really valuable, and you might have found it too, is the nurses that are like the mother nurses, the mentors, the people that have been there a long time. Were you
Mhm.
able to find those in your initial assignment, kind of?
Yeah, I was so lucky. I started off working in a burn center for 10 years, and talk about being in the trenches, man. Everybody was just super intense, but they also super cared about patient care, and they really wanted you to get it right. And so it was all about
Mhm.
like, here's what we do with these sorted wounds. Here's how we do all this fluid management. And I felt there were a couple times where I was just like, oh, this is one of those eating their young moments. Like when I was on nights and day shift nurses would like come in all crabby and you'd be like, oh my God, I just spent a whole night here. You have no idea what I went through. Be nice
Mhm.
to me. But they
Mhm.
just were very cranky and they're like, I can't have a report until I get my coffee. And it's like, oh, I've been here for so long. Um,
Yeah, and you that whole coffee thing with day shift, night shifts. Let me just say, I'm like, it is 7 o'clock.
yes,
Okay, why is it taking you 15 minutes to get this coffee? Because I
exactly.
need to go.
Yeah, it's like I also do not want to be here. I don't want to
Yes.
drive home safely, so maybe you
Mm-hmm.
could throw me a bone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But by and large, I felt incredibly supported, and I loved working at the burn unit. And I had all sorts of mentors there and people who are friends of mine to this day.
And that's amazing for students. You have to find those mentoring folks and that environment to grow in because every environment's not great for graduates, you know. And I know that right now there's a lot going on with travel nursing, and lots of times students will say, well, should I travel? I'm like, not at first. I can't
Yeah,
imagine being
yeah,
with different, I just can't imagine that that's going to be a good thing initially. I think you need to find a little home, a little nest first, you
for
know?
sure, for
Yeah.
sure. Because you need to pick up your own routine and techniques,
Mhm.
and that's what it takes. I did critical care transport for about a year before I switched hospitals to the ICU where I work now to kind of get a feel for other hospitals in the area and to see what was around. And which is kind of like travel nursing in a way because you're traveling to
Mhm.
all these different hospitals that all do things a little bit differently, although your charting remains the same. But yeah, if you're not really settled into your own personal routine and you don't know how to do a thorough assessment and you don't really understand the pharmacological things that you need to for your floor, or the gear that you need to for your floor, like if you're not intimately familiar with the ventilator and stuff, depending on if you need that, like you just I hate to say it, and that's the thing that it's really hard to impress upon people who aren't in the medical field is that becoming a nurse just takes time. It just
Mhm.
takes like a couple of years, and you really need to hopefully be in a good environment, hopefully be compensated well, and hopefully have people there, willing to like teach you and help you learn all your stuff. And then maybe you can think about traveling. But I know right now everything's out the window and people are just
Yeah,
kind of
right now,
doing what
and
they
I
learn to
and
do.
then I will tell them, the money may be good, but I'm telling you, there's some things they can't pay you enough money to do because, and I tell my students that don't chase the money because the
Yeah,
money may be good, but you need to get a good foundation so that you know
yeah,
where you are and who you are. And then nursing, I think the general public doesn't realize how compartmentalized it is. When we came up upon February 2020, and here comes COVID, all of a sudden, all the relatives, everybody were like, well, what about that? I'm like, but listen, I do labor and delivery. Let me just tell you, I know the whole viral and I know all that stuff, but I do labor and delivery. You don't want me running a ventilator or doing any of the stuff. And it's so funny because the hospital I was in was small. So I can recall when I first got there, I've been there about a year, and we had a patient that had some complications with the delivery due to some substance abuse and ended up with some kidney issues and had to be on a dopamine drip. So here we all are looking at each other like, I don't know how to do the dopamine. So we call downstairs and I'm like, hey, can you come up and do this dopamine drip? So up comes the ICU nurse who we all love, and she's just laughing. She's like, hey, y'all are RNs. You don't know how to do the dopamine drip. And she's hanging it and everything and just kind of rubbing our nose in just a little bit playfully, right? So about a month later, they have a OB patient who is like 16 weeks maybe pregnant and had some complications and had to be in ICU. And they call us up and they're like, oh, well, can somebody come down and do heart tones for us? So I'm like, oh, I got it. Oh, give me the Doppler. So I go downstairs and I'm like, hey, you mean to tell me y'all can't find these? So it's very compartmentalized as far as your expertise. You know what I mean?
so
So when
much
COVID
so.
came, of course, in the beginning, did you, I mean, maybe it was just us, but I know a lot of people, did you have any sense of what it was going to be when they first said, we got this thing that's coming and it's February 2020? Where were you kind of at with that? I was kind of like, the flu, it'll be here, it'll be gone. I wasn't grounded in where we were heading.
I've always been anxious. Let me just say, and I think that's a good thing. I think that when you're a nurse and in any field of nursing, but I feel particularly strongly as an ICU nurse, your job is just to be like the worst case scenario person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I started seeing news come out of Italy and I saw those patients prone there on their news programs, I was like, oh no, here it comes. Because I
Mm-hmm.
know that, we don't prone people unless we like
Oh,
really run
yeah.
out of options for them. And so I was super braced, but also scared. But I've always been kind of foolhardy and wanted to do weird, hard things for better or worse. It's one of the reasons why I ended up at the burn unit is because I knew that other people in my class were probably going to get all the really sexy emergency department assignments. And so
Mm-hmm.
but I looked on the list and I was like, well, if I sign up for burn and I can do that for 6 weeks, I can do anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just for all your people, when you're looking to precept, just branch out. um, and and so I did think, though, because I had burn experience and I was so used to being in isolation because of that I would be a good candidate to take care of COVID patients, which is why I volunteered at my hospital to take care of like the first COVID patients we had. Also, too, I don't have kids and my in-laws are independent and stuff. So I
Okay.
knew I was in a better situation than a lot of my coworkers who have small kids, frankly, and
Mm-hmm.
it was terrifying for them. So
Yeah, that sounds just like a nurse that just thinks what's going to be best for my team. Well, I'll go because you guys, it's perfect, just like a nurse. So, once this all kind of begins, I know for us, we weren't in inpatient, we were in an outpatient clinic. So that was a little bit different. I had worked at the health department before. And so a colleague of mine was like, I think when it got real for me was when a colleague of mine was like, well, we're looking for people to help out some at the health department doing some case investigation. So I figure you can talk on the phone, talk to the
mhm.
people. It's not a big deal. And they didn't need that much. And when I got there, and she was like, we went from three people working in this department and maybe having 2 or 3 cases of whatever a week. And now we've had 100 and whatever, and it's just us. And I started thinking to myself, okay, this is a lot of people. And then as I'm talking on the phone to people, because I'm doing this from my home on the weekend, and you get the patients that are breathless and the patients that are crying and the patients that lost their spouse. And then I end up having to call ICU nurses like you and say, hey, I can't, do you have this patient? Can you give me some demographic information? And for
Mhm.
me, that's when it became, wow, this is big. This is really, really big. Do you recall the moment that you knew that this was just the tip of the iceberg for you all at the bedside?
Yeah. So like I think around Easter weekend in 2020 is when it really kind of hammered home. And I think I even mentioned in my book, like one of our doctors came up from the emergency department and he was all like, I hate to say it, but I think the wave is here because
Mm,
they were just intubating like all these people all the time and they needed
right.
us to take care of them. And yeah, so I think we had scattered patients in March, but then April and that first wave is just like, I was like, oh, it's here. There's nothing we can do about it. We just have to keep taking care of these people and just felt this great sense of resignation and like it is what it is. And here we go, whether we like it or not.
Right, that's true. And I think that's began when a lot of the hospitals began to change their rules about visitation. And it was like
Oh
everybody
yeah.
out, get out, stay out, and for a good reason.
Yeah.
But what a lot of folks may not have thought about, and even I want nursing students to think about, is the fact that, in the area of care that you're in and that I was in labor and delivery, the family is a big part of this whole thing. They're part of birth, they're part of death. That
Mm-hmm.
there's a whole family component. And I know in your book, you speak a lot about how that was different. One of the lines that I really kind of resonated with me was that you said, when the person's there with you and they're dying, I won't know their story, you know, and that kind of sat with me. So, how were you able to? I mean, how different was it not having the family there? I've coined a term I kind of use that nurses kind of became the vehicle of grief for families, you
Oh,
know?
so lovely and
You
apt.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's really tough. because so often in the ICU, people's inclination is to just anytime anything bad happens to anyone, no matter how old they are or what comorbidities they have, if they haven't made their wishes or desires clear, been upfront, have to pulse, had to talk with their family, everyone's going to default to do everything. And it's just human nature. They want everything done. They think there's going to be a miracle. That's just how it is. And so, so often in the ICU, having family members there would be like the tipping point. They'd be like, wow, I see you've got like a CRT machine in this room. I see that you've got like, 10 pumps running. I can sense how involved their care is. And it's because they're deathly sick, because they can see all the tubes going in and all the tubes coming out, and the numbers on the wall are real for them. And so they get kind of dipped into that experience. And I do feel bad for them in a way, because I do feel like it's kind of traumatizing for somebody without a medical background to be thrown into the space of being a visitor in the ICU. It's a lot to see all that stuff happening to a loved one, for sure. But a lot of times people would be there and they'd be like, okay, time out. I don't think that grandma would want all this, or, like, I believe you now. They're definitely brain dead. Maybe we should talk about organ donation, that sort of thing. But with COVID, because you weren't allowed to have visitors, and because it did seem to strike at random, and because also too in the wild, people were having mild cases and like walking away. But then all of a sudden, for some reason you rolled the dice and your loved one's in the ICU, and we're telling you they're definitely going to die, but you're just like, but so-and-so survived. How come they got the bad draw? So, so it was hard, because nobody's ever ready to let anybody go, but definitely with the surprisingness of COVID and people not having experience with it, it was just doubly hard. So we were kind of in this twilight very often with patients, where we were taking care of people who we knew were not going to die, because I'm sorry, not that, who we knew were definitely going to die, because the damage that their lungs had incurred was such that they would just never be able to be in society again. And so we were just kind of forced to watch them coast, and knowing, it was deck chairs on the Titanic, and I feel like an asshole for saying that, because everybody's life is important, but at the same time, it feels super futile to be doing care for somebody who you know is not going to get better, and that there are also nothing's being gained by that lag too. Like, it's one thing if you go to extraordinary measures so somebody's family can fly in from another country and
that's different,
or something, then you're like, all hands on deck, let's make this happen. Grandma needs to say goodbye. But when you know that eventually nothing's going to come of all your efforts, it just really wears on you.
Yeah, that's demoralizing in a lot of ways. And I like that in the book, you kind of break down what that looks like, because, when you talk to family, like I've had the conversation with my parents, because I've taken care of a couple of patients in my rotations that didn't have their wishes made. And it was this, do everything. And my mom would always say, oh, I want them to do everything. I said, let me tell you something. Doing everything out one time, let me tell you what that looks like. Okay. So you can understand that, no, you do not necessarily want them to do everything. So I like in the book that there's that picture that you can get of, this is where we are, and so being there, I can imagine it was difficult to convey that. How do you convey that in a phone call? When somebody calls up and says, well, how's my mom doing?
You can't really. And it's sad too, because you can never give anyone false hope. And people at home are researching everything on Dr. Google, and you can't blame them for doing their own research. And they're clinging to the smallest of numbers, like say the peak goes down, and they get excited by that. But if that's not indicative of a larger trend, then they're still not going to do well,
Right.
And it's hard. So you just explain things as best you can, as frankly as you can, because you do nobody any favors by coddling them or lying to them. But people, we were able to FaceTime people a lot, and still do. And so the FaceTiming helps, because at least then they can see the person and they can be like, oh, I'm yelling at them, they're not talking back to me, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it's just really, really hard to get across, especially, and that's why so many people are just like, wouldn't make their relatives comfort care or anything. We would just keep going into the end.
Yeah, I can understand that. That's, unbelievably difficult. I think too about as you're there doing this, you're also dealing with your own mental way to process all of this. And I'm a fan of analogies. So when you say in the book, that your brain is kind of like a section at IKEA where things are compartmentalized, and I'm thinking to myself, I think to nurse, you have to have that to a certain extent. So
Yeah.
did that become a more, I mean, I think you do it subconsciously some for the most part, but did there become a point for you where you realized that it was becoming pretty full on that side where you were putting things?
Yeah, yeah. So, for people who haven't read my book or anything, which I assume is most of you guys, although you definitely should.
Yes, you definitely should.
In April, on April 25th of this past year, 2021, is when I basically told my best friends that it was how ironic it was that I was at work trying to keep people alive when I just wanted to die.
Oh.
And it was because the PTSD had caught up with me at that point. And so I've gone through like a lot of therapy and stuff to get better from that. And I realize now in hindsight that I probably did have some like low level PTSD-ish stuff from what I dealt with at the burn center, because as you can imagine, that has the opportunity to be pretty traumatic. But it was well handled, and I knew what to do with those emotions. And they were also finite because they were in my past.
Right.
The problem with COVID was that it was and is still apparently ongoing because we can't get our public health act together. And the endlessness and the futility of everything, and just the sheer sorrow from all the deaths were just really caught up with me. And so I cried for like 3 weeks straight, pretty much about everything. And then I did a lot of therapy, and then I wrote this book. But
kind of came to the front when things started happening with vaccines, because we're in this fight, and all of a sudden they start talking about vaccines, and so we're thinking, well, great, we get a vaccine, we get some help, and we're thinking everybody's gonna be on board with this initially. And so initially, of course, my parents, my mother's like, oh, well, they're doing this so fast or whatever. And I was like, let me get online and look at it. And I'm like, for real, this is not like the first, corona. There have been, and so we have some research, so I'm kind of going through this thing, and I'm thinking, well, maybe it's just, a parent or older person thing. And then the vaccine comes, and what happens is the politics and everything just kind of creates this huge rift. And so, how did that kind of talk evolve where you all were? Here you are in the unit, you're in the trenches, and you get this news of the vaccine. Did you all have conversations about what that might look like, or or hopes for what it might do?
Yeah, I mean, we just assumed so naively that people would not want to die and not want anyone else to suffer, and that this would be one of those events in which we would all get together and do the right thing for each other, especially because when you're in healthcare, that's essentially what your job is, right? Is to do the right thing all the time. And so you go through life assuming other people have your worldview, and then discovering in the worst case scenario of all time ever that people actually don't care about each other and don't want each other to survive. It was heart-wrenching. Yeah, and all the members of my family wound up getting vaccinated, but some of them still kind of buy into like it's just a flu party line, and I'm just like, I have not been in the hospital taking care of flu people all this time.
Right. Yeah.
I know what the flu is like. This is not
This
the
is
flu.
not the flu. Yeah.
Look at the death rates.
I mean, it's amazing that.
Yeah. And it's horrible too, because as a nurse in the world, and I'm sure as a nurse, any healthcare worker in the world too, is like you're simmering in it all the time. Like when I was in burn, I would take care of like burn patients, but then I would leave burn and I wouldn't be surrounded by burn. I wouldn't see anybody else.
Yeah,
and I think I see in the book too, I also don't see people running around with lit matches, right?
Right.
It was something that was kind of easy to like deal with, but like with COVID's everywhere all the time. Everybody's talking about it. People want your opinions about it. People are telling, you're watching the news and seeing people say depressingly wrong things about it. And you can't escape it. And people seem to be just wanting to run into the spinning knives as fast as they can. And it was just a really is a really rough time. It's so funny, Lawana, because I wrote this book. I finished compiling it like at the end of June, and I released it in July. And I felt such an urgency to get it out because at that brief point in time, you know, it was like pre-Delta. And I was thinking, everybody's going to forget about us. Nobody's going to remember what it was like for the nurses. So I wanted to get this into the world so that I could tell people that they were valued and they were seen. And and so, you know, I don't want to say that I end the book on a high note, but that's what my sense of urgency was from. And now here we are, and it's December 2021, and we're still doing the same shit. I can't even.
We're still doing it. Yeah, it is mind-boggling. And then, you know, when you think about, you know, the conversations that have happened about vaccines, and then the disinformation that's kind of out there, and then the conversations we have, I marvel at the conversations you have with your parents, because, you know, my mom was like, well, we're staying at home. We're not going to do. I'm like, oh, okay, you know, because and so finally, what actually got them to get vaccinated was my mother said to me, well, I know you keep telling me about this because you really don't want to have to be in the hospital with me if I get sick. I said, oh, wait a minute, excuse me. I said, you do know that if you go to the hospital, you cannot go. And my dad and mom do everything together. Like, he goes to the hairdresser, you know, all those things. I said, and you do realize that your husband will have to stay home. The next day they had appointments for vaccines because that resonated with her. You know, so I thought to myself, if I could sit down or have a conversation with each person and say, okay, tell me what's the main thing of the thing that's keeping you from getting this vaccine. It's not the science. What's the other thing? Because if we could get to that other thing, then maybe we could make a difference, you know, but it's just really been such an interesting and such a crazy ride. I also wanted to talk a little bit about humor. You know, there's so much in this book that just made me laugh, but I have to tell you now, I'm a labor and delivery nurse. And so your passage about the condom catheter, definitely, and how you hate doing the condom catheters on male patients. And you're like, you know, one time you can make small talk, but you definitely can't do that 3 times with the same patient, you know. And I was so tickled because I thought to myself, you know, in the hospital I was in, we had, it was small. So there was a med surg floor that was adjacent to peds and women's and all of that. We were all kind of like sister units. So sometimes you get pulled to the floor. Everybody hated to come in and see their name up there to be pulled because you like your little area. So one night I got pulled over to peds. Now, mind you, I work in labor and delivery, and I got pulled to clean med surg. So they give me 2. Oh, you're only going to have 2 patients. It's going to be a great night, whatever. You know, that's the setup, right? I'm like, okay, what am I supposed to do? So I get one male patient that is in stage prostate cancer, and I get another male patient that has not voided in 3 days and needs a Coude catheter. I'm like, okay, I came from vagina world, and you all couldn't find nothing but 2 people with these male, you know, issues to give me. I'm like, really? You know, so we're standing at the desk.
In their defense, though, if you could land a Foley in a lady, they were like, you got it.
And that's exactly what they said. Well, this is going to be an easy for. I was like, you know, I hate you people. But, you know, that kind of thing, people that are not nurses can hear you say things and they think, you know, my kids will often say, oh, mom, you're cold. You can. I said, but, you know, you have to have a dark kind of sense of humor to be able to do things, you know. I mean, it really, I guess my children have gotten used to it because they've had instances. They had something happen at a school and they were like, oh, this person was really distraught, but they were just playing and they said, oh, well, I'll jump off the building. And they were like, mom, if you were there, I said, well, I would have said, well, if you're going to jump off the building, you're going to have to pick a higher one if you're really trying to get hurt because you're probably going to survive this, you know. But it's where we have to live. We have to live in that place to be able to keep doing what we do, you know. So that's what makes it so, you know, so different. And that's what the joy is of the book, or was for me as a nurse, was to be able to be there at the bedside and to be able to see the things, because as you described them, I know a layperson could see them. I could smell what it smelled like, because I remember, you know, walking through the unit, there's a smell that's there, you know, and there's a sound that's there that you take home. So you can still hear those beepers. I could hear baby monitors at home from being at the job. So these are things that, you know, contribute to what's going on, you know. And when you have code after code after code, you know, I can't imagine that. And then I know you get a sixth sense. I mean, we had a sixth sense for what would happen with babies. We could tell you, we never told the doctors, of course, but we would tell each other, listen, this person's going to be in a C-section. I've already put your stuff here. Don't say anything. But we had that feel. And I'm sure you all had similar experiences in the unit, you know?
For sure. And that's another one of those things that you just don't get without experience, right? It's that spidey sense where you just go into a room, and I don't know if it's like the patient's color or or what, you know, but you can, or the way that they're like listlessly flaccid in bed or something, but you can just kind of be like, something bad is going to happen here. And you know, just like kind of like, where is the nearest crash cart, that sort of thing. Yeah, if they're
But
going to start.
there have to be some changes that are made, and they have to be big ones that are made, you know, from
Yeah.
a higher level than just the institution, because you know we have to get the autonomy that we need. We have to be able to get the staffing that we need to support. I mean, you need to be able to work 12 hour. How many times you work 12-hour shift and have not gone to the bathroom? That should not be happening.
Yeah.
You know, those type of things. So there's so many things that need to change what's going on, to invite more nurses in and to take care of the nurses that we do have. You know, it makes a difference.
Yeah, that's I guess that's one of the many things that I'm bitter about is that there just seems to not be an inclination to take care of the staff that you currently have. And I hear all these reasons for that, like, oh, you know, when they pay travelers, that comes out of some sort of like different financial piles, so it makes more sense somehow. But I'm like, does it really though?
Yeah, because
especially now that COVID seems like it's going to be with us for a long time. Is it really the smartest move to keep paying travelers indefinitely rather than making your existing staff happy?
Yeah, you need to make some changes that are going to keep your core staff, because even though travelers have their place, but still your core staff that's there on the floor determines the flavor of that floor, and also determines the spirit that's in the institution and hospital that you're in, you know, because I know hospitals always want to be centers of excellence and all those type of titles, but those things actually come from the way people feel when they're in your space. It doesn't come from big spaces or nice new modern spaces. It comes from the people and the way they feel. You know, it's just like with us with homes. You can go to somebody that has a small home and you can feel something in that home that just draws you. I mean, I have friends, and you probably do too, that you have to determine when you're going to their house, because you know you're never going to get out within like 30 minutes, because it's just one of those environments that just invites you so much. And then you have others that, you know, you can have a big, beautiful, huge mansion, and I just want to drive through the driveway and drop off my stuff because the spirit is not, you know, what it needs to be there. So
100%.
So we definitely need a shift. So where you're at now, is there something that you're hopeful about personally? You know, because I find myself now, I like this, and this is the last phrase I'm going to say from your book. Now, I wrote down a lot of them, but this is the last one because I don't want to give it all away. But you said, I need to be delighted. And I thought to myself, man, I think I need to be delighted too. I love that, you know, feeling of thought. Maybe that's what, because, you know, you just wake up every morning, you're like, I'm here and the sun is shining and all these things, but I need to be delighted. So what is it that you're finding delight in these days?
It has nothing to do with the hospital, unfortunately.
That's fine. And that's fine.
But I actually write paranormal romance. And so that's how come. It's so funny. People come to my book and they're like, oh, this is so well written. And I'm like, hey, thank you very much. And then, but they're always like, how did you write it? And I was like, well, I've been writing for 20 years, you know, and I have had some books traditionally published in the past. And I'm in the process of attempting to relaunch that career. And I've got some friends on board to help me do it as well as I can. And things seem to be like, it's going to, hopefully everything will kick into gear in January. And so that's what I feel hopeful about. I don't know if it'll be enough to get me away from bedside nursing, because that's the aim with it. But writing fiction has been a really great way for me to just get away from reality and get away from the and during COVID times, especially, not COVID times, we're still in it, but in 2020 especially, to not be anywhere else, just like in a world of my own making, where I can control everything. I know it's going to have a happy ending because it's a romance, that sort of thing, you know. So I think between reading a lot more romance novels lately, and people make fun of romance novels, you really shouldn't. There's a lot of value in finding joy.
Yeah, and sometimes you need to be in a different place and you can't physically be there.
Yeah.
So, you know, the beauty of books that I've always loved, because I've read since I was little. I used to read so much when I was little. I will tell you that I actually I was, you know, as African Americans, we like hot comb our hair. And I actually was reading a book and stuck the hot comb in my hair and burnt off a patch of my hair on the side of my head from reading a book. That's how much of a reader I was. But what I love is that you can be anywhere, anybody, transported to a whole nother space.
Yeah.
You know? So there's a beauty in that.
That's what I've enjoyed lately is reading a bunch and writing a bunch and just feeling like I'm taking doing what I'm passionate about again in a big way. And, maybe it'll pay off financially, but even if it doesn't, I don't feel like I've wasted any time there. I
Yeah,
need it
that's
for my spirit right
amazing.
now.
Yeah. And to restore your spirit means that it's going to allow you to continue to be a caring and compassionate nurse too,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? And that caring and compassion starts with you being caring and compassionate of you yourself, you
It,
know?
it does. It does. Because you
Yeah.
really have to find balance. Like I do have coworkers who are still crushing it on the overtime front, but I'm just like,
Yeah.
it's not that they're bad nurses anymore, but they're not happy nurses anymore.
Right.
and
Yeah.
and I just I get that it's great to pay off your car to put your kids through college. I 100% understand that,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not. I don't feel like it's good for your soul to be at the hospital, 16 hours
Right.
a day
Yeah.
for 5 days a
Mm-hmm.
week.
Yeah, you got to restore your soul. So I definitely think you've moved in the right direction with that. And I will tell you that one of the things that has delighted me has been being able to read this book. So I'm
Thank
so
you.
happy that you shared the Twitter stuff and the journal stuff and all the things that are in there. So everybody needs to read this book. Year of the Nurse. You can get it on Amazon,
You can
and
get it
it
anywhere. It's out
anywhere.
all the
Oh,
bookstores.
great! Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful! And it is just amazing, and it's a really insightful look inside the mind of what it's like to be there. And I really have enjoyed it because it's given me a good perspective, and I also have enjoyed being able to meet you. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you so much, and I thank you so much for joining me. And I do hope that in the future we will have a chance. I believe that connections are made and connections grow from where they are. So I often think that the people that I meet are not met just for then, but they are kind of like a vine that's there that will reconnect with me at some point. So when that point comes, I'll be happy to see where you are and what kind of delightful things are going on then.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lawana. This has
Thank you
been so
so
great.
much. I enjoyed it so much, and I hope you enjoy your holiday. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye bye.